companies were gamifying the consumption of tokens, right? They were creating leaderboards, and engineers were trying to like get to the top of that leaderboard to the point that they were using tokens inefficiently on projects that were better off not using tokens. They were using tokens like on personal projects, all this stuff just to completely turn around and put not just like a slight cap, like a pretty material cap on the use of tokens. Welcome to the Wellable Weekly Podcast, where we talk about key topics and trends at the intersection of well-being, technology, and HR. I'm Nick, along with my good friend and co-host, Geoff. Geoff, I'll just say it to myself, welcome back, Nick. I've been gone for a little bit.
Yeah, the dream team's back together. Good to have you back on. We had a couple fantastic guests, but nothing like getting the original two back in the studio.
Completely agree. We did have some great guests. If you haven't checked out those episodes, definitely do it. But it feels good to be back. Had a good little vacation. Got a little sun. So let's hop right into it. A short little hiatus. And you would think that maybe the topics we generally talk about have changed, but the answer is not really. AI is still dominating the news stories here. The big story, I think, is I feel like AI is always, everything's talking about AI now. It's about expenses, right? How much does it cost to purchase intelligence? Which model should you use? Which ones are cheaper? Which ones, should you go take an open source versus a closed source? And Tesla came in the news today because in general about the policy announcement that they made, which I'll talk about in a bit, but also Tesla is like a little bit like the quintessential non-AI company. And what I mean by that is they're not out there developing their own model, at least not to my knowledge, right? I mean, Elon Musk has his own version with SpaceX, but they are very AI forward. Like the future of Tesla is like not really cars anymore, although that's what we know Tesla for, is like really robots, and then auto driving, which is like pretty much an AI tool. And the vehicle, no pun intended, is the car. And so it's as AI forward as you can without being like a frontier model company. And what was like really interesting is that they announced a new policy that Tesla employees will now need to get sign off from their manager to spend more than $200 a week in tokens from AI. There's only one exception, probably worth noting, that SpaceX via xAI is trying to build their own frontier model. So if you want to be a beta user or use one of their beta applications, there's no limit there. But the general news is that Tesla employees, like many other people, recognize that that model is inferior to the really good models. And so the people who want to use Claude, right, or OpenAI or whatever it may be, like a true frontier model, will likely, if they want to use it in any meaningful way, will likely need to get manager approval.
Yeah, it really illustrates the spectrum of AI adoption across different types of companies. I mean, this is a high-end version of AI adoption where you are needing to throttle and put guardrails in place for how much employees can spend on AI credits. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, you have companies who are really just trying to get employees to experiment with different tools and build it into their workflows. I mean, even at this high end, I think what we saw earlier this year even was almost like this gold rush mindset of spend, use as many credits as you can, take off the governor. And
token
even companies
maxing.
Like Tesla now are, token maxing. Exactly. That's really the trend that precipitated this pullback, in the sense of Tesla and others now saying, hey, we have to rein this in a little bit. It's getting out of control. We incentivized the use of AI to the point where it's impacting people's bonuses and paychecks. And of course, that type of incentive is going to drive behavior. And it went too far. And I think even for those companies who are just starting to, get onto this continuum of AI adoption, or not even close to needing to, curtail spend, it's clear that Tesla's still figuring it out, right? Microsoft and others are still figuring it out, where they're kind of seesawing on their own policies and haven't really had stability when it comes to incorporating AI into their workforces in the way that's sustainable and scalable.
What a big turnaround! Like 6 months ago, right, in the beginning of the year, and I'll make this comment about Tesla, but it actually applies to all these different companies, many of which we've talked about, is that companies were gamifying the consumption of tokens, right? They were creating leaderboards, and engineers were trying to like get to the top of that leaderboard to the point that they were using tokens inefficiently on projects that were better off not using tokens. They were using tokens like on personal projects, all this stuff just to completely turn around and put not just like a slight cap, like a pretty material cap on the use of tokens. And they're not the only ones. Like to your point, like Tesla's in the news. I think partially given the cap is so low, but you have other companies like Uber who said they went through their 2026, their full budget for annual budget for tokens through March. And now they've gone out. I think their cap is $1,500 a month. So, call it double what Tesla's doing. And these companies were gassing us so hard, encouraging all these employees to use tokens for every little thing. And now they've gone like completely reverse, which is kind of just a crazy dynamic.
100%, right? And I do kind of wonder if the next phase, right, is really figuring out which models that are going to be permissible within organizations. And I know you mentioned within Tesla, there's obviously kind of that unique circumstance where you have the XAI tool that is of course something that Elon Musk is probably very partial to and makes special exceptions for. But I think that could be kind of the next phase for many organizations, is kind of picking a lane and committing to it, and that might help with more widespread adoption of these tools across companies that are probably trying to figure out exactly, well, your average employee is probably trying to figure out, what can I use? Am I allowed to use Claude? Should I be using just Copilot because it's in that Microsoft stack? Can I be using ChatGPT and these other, solutions? I think when organizations can kind of pick a lane, give good guidance, that's probably when you'll start to see, more consistent and hopefully, measured adoption.
Yeah, the other thing I think is kind of like, I think the story behind the story, and maybe like, the real story in some ways, is that Tesla has the funds, Uber has the funds, Microsoft have the funds, that if there was a real ROI to this token usage, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. Even if the token expenses were quadruple, if Uber had gone through its budget in one quarter, but had all this stuff to show for it, and all these benefits to show for it, I don't think that would have been an issue. They say, okay, well, we have to allocate more dollars to this thing because we see a great investment here. And maybe that results in less dollars elsewhere, or that some funding or just drawing from profits, whatever it was, they would find the way to make the fund. Like the Silicon Valley technology mindset is that it's okay to spend into the growth mode, right? It's okay to like really, really invest in areas that you think have strong returns. And my guess is the fact they're capping this is that they're not seeing those returns, right? And my guess is that it's not like they're close, like, hey, the returns are lower than we expected. I think in some cases, the dollars spent on these tokens have a negative ROI, at least today, right? Not to say in the future that's going to be the case, but right now it seems like every company's trying to figure it out. And while they figure it out, they're going to limit usage just to better manage that expiration period. But Tesla's one side of the story, right? There's another big article with Starbucks as well, and Starbucks, which is interesting because Tesla's a technology company, and Starbucks, while they do have a CTO and they do some proprietary products like a mobile app and things like that, they are not a technology company. They are a coffee company. And what's amazing for them is, I think the news article is that they say their annual software spend is $400 million, right? And a lot of that money goes to Microsoft and Oracle and like IBM for point of sale machines, to all this other technology, supply chain logistics, et cetera. They believe that they're going to AI their way out of a huge portion of that spend, right? And I think, the overarching, because Starbucks is kind of I want to say it's restructuring, but it has a new CEO. They're trying to, turn around the company a little bit. It's still a great brand. So they're trying to do $2 billion of cuts across the company. And a huge portion of those cuts are going to come from software spend. And they believe that they are, from their own engineers, plus AI, plus like the leadership from a CTO, are going to be able to rebuild software that they've been using for decades from these software giants.
I'm sure the software companies that you mentioned are going to closely watch this effort from Starbucks, right? I mean, it could be kind of a pivotal exercise in that ongoing SaaS apocalypse narrative of whether companies are eventually going to be able to reproduce or very closely mimic the software that they've been paying third parties for decades now, right? And to your point, right? Like Starbucks, it's a coffee company. I mean, they're certainly not one of those types of companies like even Tesla, a car company, really, but has evolved to a technology company. I don't really think you can put Starbucks in that bucket, but they're taking on pretty lofty initiatives here to try to again replace hundreds of millions of dollars worth of software spend through internal resources and the use of some of these new AI tools. It's just one of those things where it seems like that is going to be very difficult to achieve. In that same article, I remember reading that they were using a AI powered inventory solution, and after using it for a little bit, they kind of abandoned it and just reverted to good old fashioned manual counting. And you wonder how much of that is really going to play out in practice, right? Where again, the idea of being able to bring all this in house, cut software spend, almost like we'll talk about some of the other articles about trimming and removing parts of management structures. That all sounds nice in theory, but in practice, I just don't know if you're going to see those real results that allow you to keep up the same kind of efficiency and output with tools that you're kind of cobbling together from scratch.
I'm gonna lose my mind if all of a sudden like the final product from Starbucks is like an abacus and some guy in the back just like counting boxes or filters or whatever it is. That being said, I feel like a lot of the technology like narrative around AI, but in general, is always so future oriented. Like just go back to Tesla, we're talking about humanoid robots, right? And auto driving cars. And while we have some of that today in the latter bucket, we're still really, really far away from like literally no drivers at all. But Starbucks is claiming that we're going to see some of these software rollouts by the end of the year. We're talking about less than 6 months from now, we're going to see if Starbucks has come to fruition on some of these projects to some degree very quickly. And if that happens, I think that's going to be let's assume it's successful. Say they can lose whichever those vendors were the three that we mentioned. One of them, I forget, does the point of sale system. Let's assume
Oracle.
That they're,
Yep.
Oracle, that they're going to be able to completely remove them, right? That's going to make companies, even including like companies like Wellable, like really concerned about like how you can vibe code your way out of this. And the one thing we know for sure, I can't imagine Starbucks is not going to have a huge AI bill for this. And if they do this, that's going to be maybe, who knows, maybe Tesla comes back at the end of the year and saying, hey, we've changed our mind. There's no longer a cap. We're going to be able to vibe code our way out of our Microsoft relationships, our Oracle relationships, and so forth. But to your point, Starbucks is trying to save money. And every company's trying to save money in these kind of like very tumultuous economic times. And they're also trying to invest heavily in new things like AI. And so that money needs to come from somewhere. And I'm not sure if this really applies to Starbucks, but it is overall a broader narrative around companies saving money in a lot of different ways. And as it relates to employee headcount, it's really disproportionately hitting middle managers.
Yeah, the middle management story is one that, again, we've been talking about for a while now. This latest article, Gartner projecting that 1 in 5 companies will eliminate more than half their middle managers by the end of this year. And it's this ongoing efficiency story, flattening the structure, faster decisions, better margins, right? Savings opportunities. Again, the surface level narrative certainly is appealing. I think in practice, it's probably kind of tale of two stories where unequivocally there are organizations out there with bloat that have many dozens of layers of management that inevitably slows up decision making and could benefit from some efficiency. But I think there's also situations where you have um, organizations that are overdoing it. And the one story that stood out to me in this article is one tech company cut 70% of its engineering managers in 2024, saved 3.2 million. The VP of engineering now has 47 direct reports. He approves decisions in Slack between meetings, no context, no coaching. 6 months in, their best engineer quits. In the exit interview, nobody here knows what I'm working on or why it matters. The VP was too swamped to notice that she just completely checked out until the resignation hits. That's the cautionary tale.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that actually sounds like it happened pretty quickly. I would probably, absent of a story like that, I would say this is such short-term thinking. Like in the short term, you cut a bunch of middle managers, your team has recently received feedback, they know what they're working on, they have some guidance. So in the short term, you have lower costs, you have higher profits. Technically, you do speed up decision making the more layers you cut. And so that's all great in the short term. And maybe AI can supplement or fill that in. I mean, that's the belief, right? Take Jack Dorsey, CEO and founder of Block. His vision is having no middleman, no managers at all, and he would have all 6,000 employees report to him. Now he recognizes he can't give feedback to all 6,000, but he believes that there can be an AI Jack Dorsey who can give feedback to every employee, who can kind of align the organization around a common vision. Remains to be seen, but that's the belief. But until you know that's true, you're really making a short-term bet, hoping there'll be some you're not going to have a long-term real cost there, right? And if you think about to that person, that example you mentioned, that engineer, right? You are having people like her, these high potential employees, right? Who are, even though they're high potential, aren't satisfied, also aren't getting developed. This person could be the best engineer of that company, but they also still probably need to learn about making tough calls, right? How do you digest decisions? Like in the world that we operate, you make a binary decision often. Go this direction, go that direction. But the reality is it's not that clear. And you can't hedge it. You just have to make a decision. And that's a skill set that all these junior employees need to develop for themselves, but then also for the company, because one day that company is going to rely on them to make those tough decisions. And that doesn't happen without training and feedback and things like that. And the stat in that article that really actually stood out to me more than the 1 in 5 one you mentioned is that because Gen Z is growing up in this world, into the workforce, where they've seen this overall trend of middle managers getting cut, is that only 6% of Gen Zs wants to be a senior leader at one point, right? This is according to some Deloitte research. And I just think they're seeing the risk. They're just thinking, why not be an individual contributor? I'm more likely to have a stable job. I don't want to risk this broader trend that doesn't reflect my personal performance of cutting middle managers. And all of a sudden I get left. I just couldn't imagine being new to the workforce and thinking of all my colleagues and friends and the jobs I had when I was 22 to 26, and only 6% of us aspiring to want to be in some type of senior leadership role.
Exactly. And I think they they see middle management layers being cut, and they see managers who are still in those positions of oversight and having responsibility over teams stretch further than they ever thought possible, not having the time or ability to look after teams the way they would like, and not really having the capacity to maybe develop some of those analytical or problem solving skills like you mentioned. The IC role looks pretty appealing, right? And just being able to kind of do your thing, use tools at your disposal, but not have to be in a place where you're maybe growing into a type of leadership or management level that's not as valued as it once was. And for those fewer spots that are left, you're going to be in a really stretched position. You're also in a place now where you're not just thinking about managing human capital, you're also thinking about managing agents. And there was a really interesting article that came out, I think it was the Seattle Times, but they studied a organization, BCG, kind of looked into what managers kind of did when they were vetting work conducted by agents rather than human employees, and the research showed that they basically spent less time reviewing those documents because the perception was, it came from software, it came from technology, so it doesn't require the same level of diligence or review that a human generated draft or work product would require. When, of course, as we know, from hallucinations to AI saying yes, never telling you no, there's so many reasons why a AI produced deliverable requires just as much, if not more, scrutiny than a human produced work product. But that perception is just there, that it's good enough or it's not their responsibility to look after that. And that's a whole nother area of development and experience that so many people just don't have yet, and will need to hone and develop over time, is what it's like to not only work with human colleagues, which we're all pretty well acclimated to, but also be working with and reviewing the work of agents.
Yeah, and the agents don't need feedback. Like, even if you think your job as a manager, your job is to review and be in final owner. The buck stops here for work product, but also your job is to give feedback, right? And it's very clear in like 360 reviews if you're not giving feedback. So you have to review it just to do the second tenet of your job, where that second part, I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think anyone's coming in like they're reprompting the agent, but they're not like really giving feedback to the agent, right? It's like, you don't say thank you to the agent, right? You don't recognize it. You don't do those things. And so
can't waste those tokens.
Yeah, and those being required to do the thing makes you do the other thing you're responsible for, which is review the product. And to your point, it's like, I remember seeing that article and thinking like, that's just like crazy to me.
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's a whole new world, but that seems like a good place to wrap up the pod for today. Always a great discussion, Nick. Thanks for all the listeners who tune in. As a reminder, you can get your Wellable Weekly fix on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to Wellable Weekly newsletter as well for all the latest insights. Thank you.